digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined by Brett from Buzz My Videos. We have Dave, who is formerly from PlayStation but currently consulting. And we have Steve from Amplified Robot back again. Welcome back, Steve.
Hi, Tanya.
Would you care to introduce yourselves, gentlemen, and explain a little bit more about what you're up to? And I'm going to start with you, Brett.
Okay, hi, my name's Brett. I'm the Content and Platform Manager at Buzz My Videos. Buzz My Videos is a multi-channel, multi-platform online video network with 5,000 plus creators across the globe. We're working on platforms like YouTube and Dailymotion and AOL, and also expanding into other video platforms as well. Like just recently we expanded into the streaming platform called YouNow.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dave, why don't you explain more about what you do?
Hi, yeah, so I've been a game developer for Sony for 17 years, and then at the beginning of 2016, I realised that 2016 is the year of VR, and decided to leave Sony to set up my own VR studio. I've spent 3 years at Sony R&Ding VR, creating some great demos that we've shown, from the London Heist to Street Blues to the Deep. And now I really want to focus my attention on multi-platform VR, specifically around entertainment, but I'm also interested in health and education.
Wonderful, thank you. And Steve, why don't you tell us all about what you do at Amplified Robot?
All right, Tanya. Well, Amplified Robot's been in AR and VR for quite a number of years now, and really Amplified Robot, we're turning it into a VR and AR lab, because we do so much varied work in those areas. We're actually currently working on something which is quite exciting, which is a virtual reality training module for training surgeons called Medical Realities. But we've got lots of other things that I can talk about as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And for our listeners, I am Tanya, the founder of Digital Jam, and I will be your friendly host and guide through this Digital Jam session. Now, today's show, we are going to be discussing the future of, wait for it, VR again. But we're talking this time less about the entertainment and film and games, but more about the other applications for VR that aren't necessarily as discussed. And so I want to kind of open the floor to you, Steve, first of all, because with medical realities, obviously, you've kind of been there entrenched in the kind of front lines of this for quite some time. And at that coalface, there's obviously a lot of different discussion around what the use and application of VR can be. But I think you've really seen the reality of that, no pun intended, from a medical perspective. Why don't you expand on that for us?
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Tanya. I mean, I think that where we are with medical realities, well, let's wind it back a bit. Why we're using virtual reality for training in medicine? We're particularly interested in training surgeons, and surgeons work not just by themselves, they work in an environment surrounded by other people inside an operating theatre. And we found that using virtual reality, we can actually put medical students and trainees actually into that environment in a very convincing way, which actually helps how they teach, but also helps how they understand what it's like to be a surgeon as well. So, I mean, I think the important things about virtual reality are it's immersive and it's actually emotive as well. And I think that those are two really good tools to have in an education and training environment.
I'm curious, Dave, from your perspective, obviously Steve's talking here about the application of VR in education from a medical perspective, but just going to the education kind of aspect here, what do you think is the importance or how important do you think gaming principles and methodology is to educating within VR?
Well, I mean, I think, Steve actually mentioned it there, the immersive nature of VR is incredibly compelling and incredibly engaging. So I think it's been interesting in the past to see the gamification of things like education, and I think that has a certain amount of value. I actually think the immersive nature of VR is stronger than that. So I'm more interested in the interactive elements of VR for education and training. So I think the fact that you can be fully immersed, that it's yourself and it's not empathy with a third person, in that environment, and that you can interact with the environment around you is incredibly powerful. And I also think that one of the criticisms around VR is the singular nature of experience. And there's a lot of things we can do to make it a shared experience. But actually, in terms of education, I think the singular nature can be quite powerful because let's say you were learning French, for example. Actually, having some headphones on, being in an environment means you're really focused and concentrating on learning French, and you're not distracted by the person next to you or somebody walking in the room, for example. So, for me, I think VR has a great opportunity to compel people to learn and to train. And it's going to be very cost effective, right? I mean, if you need to train nurses in one country about what the hospital is going to be like in another country, then, getting them to put on a Gear VR headset and go through a half-hour training module, it's very engaging, and they actually get the sense of what the hospital layout is like and so on and so forth. That, using an onboarding experience like that, it's going to be very compelling and very cost effective.
So in terms of the social interaction that we're talking about here, and this idea that for study and for education, yes, being in an insular environment is probably actually a good thing. But then there is also this area that hasn't really been explored or discussed, which is this idea of social interaction. Now, I'm curious, Steve, from your perspective, what your thoughts are in terms of how we encourage that idea of sociability within VR, because I know that there's been a lot of discussion around, for example, the kind of shared cinema experience. You go into VR and you're in a theatre watching a film on a screen. It's like a screen within a screen. But that idea that you can then see other players or other audience members, in the room that you can interact with. What's your take on the kind of the potential for social interaction within VR as we see it at the moment?
I think the shared experience is quite interesting, and it sort of touches on what we were just sort of talking about in training and education. I've seen some fascinating videos of VR being used in the classroom for children, and it's amazing to see how well that they take to it and they embrace it and they want to get more of it. And I think it's very interesting that the Google Cardboard have actually come out with a system whereby the teacher can control what everybody's seeing on their headsets, so that they will all see everything at the same time. So if they're being transported to the Colosseum in ancient Rome 2,000 years ago, they'll all be at the same point of the VR experience, and they'll take that experience in unison. And I think that's actually sort of a very important thing to do. Now, introducing other people around you, I think that's also a very interesting concept, and I think it will lend itself to some parts of education, some parts of training. But as you say, sometimes it's better that you actually sort of do your education on a one-to-one basis, because also having said that the class can see everything also all at the same time, actually I see VR as being something which could really help people at different stages with inside a classroom setup.
So Brett, from your perspective, from a social perspective, we were talking about this idea that the insular experience is great for education, but where therefore does this social experience really come into its own in the context of VR? Because I do find it quite difficult, this notion that you're putting essentially a black box on your head so that you can be in a black box environment, not seeing anything else that's going on around you. And yet there is this kind of development area that people are working within where they're dropping you into another area with other audience members, other people that you can see and you can talk to, and you can have that international conversation with 3 different people all from different places in one virtual room somewhere. It actually takes me back, just touching on PlayStation Home once upon a time, with lots of players running around and then popping into a theatre and sitting down and watching a movie together. But Brett, I'm curious what your take is on that idea of social collaboration and social experience within VR.
Well, I think it's about looking at the people who are trying to push it forward at the moment. So obviously Facebook is the main company who are really looking to push the social experience of VR. And what that's going to look like, I don't think any of us quite know at this point. And even Mark Zuckerberg has said, look, what the social VR experience will be something built on completely new software and technology, and also built to be a completely new experience. I do think there is Facebook's mantra is to create a world that's more open and connected. So I do think there is going to be this idea of being able to have a shared experience with other people, where you can, like you said, you can step into a room and have your own personal avatar and be able to have a shared experience, whether that's watching a movie, whether that's having an actual live meeting, whether that's going on a gaming experience, or maybe even engaging in some sort of travel experience as well. But I do think there is also going to be the thing to consider will be we're still at very early stages. So yes, we have these gigantic black boxes that people are putting on their heads. We have kind of first generation cameras and technology that are coming up. But I think if VR is accepted by the mass market and consumers the way that everyone is predicting it will, then we will see evolution in that technology. And once it becomes, the actual tech becomes less of the focus and becomes more ubiquitous, I think we're going to see more and more different applications of it as well. I think just like social has many different diverse ways of it being used, where we have at one end of the scale Facebook, but we might have at the other end of the scale people who are using things like Snapchat or WhatsApp for social experience. I think, to be honest, I don't think there is an answer yet for it. And I think what I'm really fascinated about is what happens at that other end of the scale of once the technology, the barrier of the technology is taken out of the way, and we can see people actually starting to experiment and adopt this technology and use it in different ways. Are we going to have an ethereal VR experience like on Snapchat? Or are we going to see things like tourism used more? Are we going to see things like one-to-one social meetings or social meetups happening more and more? And how that's going to look, how you experience that, who knows?
So there's 2 points I want to take from that. And the first I'm going to throw at you, Steve. And that is this idea that actually, we are talking about technologies that ultimately they require you to put on a black box. And that's okay for these early adopters and these people who really, hardcore gamers and fanboys of VR who want to put on a headset. But the mainstream public, maybe they feel a little bit like they did about the Google Glass, which is, you know what, I don't really want to be a geek. I don't really want to put that thing on my head or, have that thing on my face. And I know that we've had this conversation in the past before, but actually this idea that perhaps it's going to be something like AR that will actually be the thing that really, grabs the imagination of that mainstream public, the people who, aren't necessarily technologically savvy or, want to have all of the coolest, Apple devices or Samsung devices in their home. What's your take on this in terms of, do you think that perhaps this is really just about a transitionary period to another technology?
I think it'll be sort of horses for courses, Tanya. I think you're right. I think that to start off with, I think there are a lot of people that are prepared to put the sort of black box on their head right now to get particular experiences. But I think that as technology goes forward and that we can actually reduce the size of that, make it lighter weight, make it a truly sort of wearable design that people will be happy to wear most of the time, then that actually then starts to transition into the AR and augmented reality or mixed reality side of things. So I suspect that anything you can wear, a little bit like the ODG glasses that are available now, they can actually be virtual reality glasses or augmented reality glasses. So I suspect that that's a way that things will go. And yes, I mean, I think it's actually going forward extremely fast now. I think that the new headsets by Microsoft and Meta are pushing that forward very, very fast, faster than I think people thought might be the case.
I tend to agree with you on that in terms of the speed at which these things are kind of churning out. But Dave, I have another question for you, and this is one that's actually comes from the conversations that we had in the VR Writers' Room that Steve was part of. And that was this idea that actually environmental gaming or that idea of environments within VR being therapeutic and therefore just purely by the notion of being able to say, you know what, I'm going to put on this VR headset and I'm going to be, beside a beautiful beach in Bali, or I'm going to go, and put this headset on and I'm going to be in that war zone that caused me that trauma in the first place, so that I can get over it, or whatever that thing is. But the idea of immersing the individual within an environment just purely to facilitate, therapy, or to facilitate some kind of treatment, is quite an interesting one. And I know that there's been some research recently about the benefits of the environmental therapy to neutralize pain, for example. And they're talking about using that in dentistry, for example, to actually help people mentally think beyond the pain. And I'm curious, Dave, what your thoughts are on this, given that environmental gaming is one of those areas that not a huge amount of people necessarily know exactly what it means.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an interest in making like a well-being, therapeutic, chill-out experience for VR. And actually, when we do demos to people, pretty much everyone says that. Do you know what would be great? Because I think everyone in the busy lives we have has a stressful time, and the idea of switching off and chilling out is very appealing to people. In one of the demos we made in the London studio before I left, it was called The Deep, and actually it does end up with you being attacked by a shark. But the first 3 layers are beautiful. And really, the interaction is very light. In fact, a lot of people don't even realise there's interaction happening. It's really about, if you look at something, it will then kind of come to life and respond to you. Exactly. So that might be the first layer is we call the sunshine zone, and you're just underneath the surface of the water. You can see schools of fish swimming around. You see a beautiful sea turtle, and if you look at the turtle, then he engages with you, and people find it really, really quite relaxing. In fact, I demoed it to Mary Portis only last week or the week before, and she was actually had that. She was a bit concerned about gaming. She thought it was for teen boys, and she it's pretty much a 180-degree turnaround when she did that. She said exactly that. Wouldn't this be great? Wouldn't it be great for people who are in long-term care in hospital, for example? To be able to not be in a hospital bed, but be in a beautiful garden. And relax and take them to another place. And that really, just plays the strengths of VR, which is it's a transportation system to take you to a place where, you wouldn't otherwise be. And I think as we get, people talk about presence, and there's been a number of mentions about, at the moment, everybody's trying to get the technology right. And I'm really interested in beyond the technology, because we will get the technology right. And yes, obviously that's very important, but it's what we do with it and how we use it. So if we can transport somebody to a well-being place, I think that's a huge win, for what VR can do. And I just want to touch on something that kind of relates to earlier on in these conversations, actually, about, are people going to strap this black box to their face? And I've got my own little theory about this, which is a lot of people of a certain generation have seen the film Alien, and will remember John Hurt's part in it, where, as well as an alien coming out of his tummy, it also kind of fixes itself on his face, right? And I think when people see VR who haven't tried it, they think, oh my God, there's this thing and it's taking away all my senses and it's claustrophobic, and then they experience it and it's actually the opposite, fundamentally the opposite. And I think that just highlights the importance of sampling in VR and getting people to really understand what the benefits and the opportunities that really are there. So for me, I think that's something that we all need to, as an industry, as a growing industry, we need to take seriously.
It's interesting that you say this, though, because there is that experience that people have for the first time when they put a headset on, even if it's just a cardboard, and people have what they call the VR face. Where it's that whole moment of wonder. It's like the childlike Disney wonder moment, where they're like, wow, this is what it really means for VR. But then there's this other thing that I think is also very interesting to note, and one which I think we as an industry, as a VR industry, still need to address it, is this idea that actually, because VR is so misunderstood by the mainstream public, yes, early adopters get it and they understand it, but for the mainstream public, there's still very much, a degree of the unknown when it comes to VR. And so their first experience in VR is the one that defines for them what the entirety of the medium means. So if they have a poor experience, if they have that sim sickness, they will just refuse to put on a headset ever again. They will just say, you know what, I've done this, I've done the VR thing, it makes me sick. And that will be their assumption for all VR going forwards, irrespective of the spectrum, whether it's a 360 film, whether it's true VR, with an Oculus on your head, or whether it's something, in between. They're not going to want to give it another chance, because as far as they're concerned, that one experience, whatever that first experience was, is the full representation of the medium for them. If somebody said, you know what, I watched a movie and I didn't like the steam train coming at me out of the screen, I'm never going to watch another film on any device. I'm not going to watch it on a TV, on a mobile, on a tablet, on the cinema. I'm never going to watch another film. It feels very similar in terms of that broad sweeping assumption that actually if I have a bad experience with VR, I'm just not going to give it another go, irrespective of whether it's on a mobile, whether it's on a head-mounted display, or whether it's in an arena, And Steve, I'm curious from your perspective, how we as an industry are necessarily going to be able to address this potential danger of mainstream consumers just not wanting to interact with it because they've had that bad first experience.
I think it's a very important point, and I think that everybody inside this fledgling industry has to take responsibility for this and has to make sure that people get the best possible experience, because I think you're totally correct when you say that one bad experience, not only will it put them off, but I think everybody tells everybody else, 12 other people, if they have a bad experience. So it's something which actually sort of could spread like wildfire as well. So I think it's important that everybody does actually create things properly. And this is one of the reasons that I started a meetup group, which is Augmenting Reality. And that was to actually talk about what's possible in AR and VR, but also to raise the bar and get people to understand that we actually have, as an industry, a fledgling industry, be very careful about how we move forward, because, as you say, one bad experience could actually have a very, very bad effect on everybody inside the business.
I'm going to just comment on this because you've said it, and because I know that if Kevin were on this call, he would disagree with you.
He disagrees with everybody.
Well, he would say that you're talking about this being a fledgling business, but or industry, but at the same time, from somebody like Kevin's perspective, we're in the fourth phase of VR. And I'm curious, Dave, from your perspective, obviously you've been around the games industry for quite some time, and I don't know if you was around for the first, second, or third phase of VR, but what's your take on this? Because obviously from a games industry perspective, this is one of those things that has been around for an awfully long time, but it's often been misunderstood, it's often been misrepresented, and we're at this cusp of something quite interesting, but there's still a very significant danger that, it could all... the bubble could burst and it could all go back to just being that pipe dream that the games industry had. I want to hear what your thoughts are on this, Dave.
Okay, well, I mean, there's been a few other goes at this in the past, and the outcome of those wasn't brilliant. But the technology is there that, there's a great... So I think it's worth pointing out there are great experiences in VR now. We've all had them, I'm sure. And there are some that give sim sickness. Now, we want everyone to get those great experiences. I mean, there's something with the platform holders themselves. They're not going to want to give people bad experiences with their products either. So I actually think, in terms of like in the gaming industry, we have TRCs, which are technical requirements, and there will be TRCs that govern these sorts of things. And there'll be, if there's a quote core game that is going to give some people sim sickness, I think the platforms will flag that. I actually think that most people's first experience is going to be mobile. It's going to be cardboard or Gear VR or something like that. And so with those, there's generally shorter experiences. There's probably not going to be a great deal of motion. It's going to be more about just awe and wonder of an environment or something. So I think that it will be self-policing, to be honest. I think one or two things will get out there and they'll get a reputation. And even just informally, like if I'm going to turn up in a coffee bar and show a mate a VR experience on my phone and headset, I'm not going to want them to feel sick. So if I do that once, I'm not going to show somebody that again. So I know there's this, what if 12 people have this terrible experience? And I get that. I think it's going to self-police itself fairly quickly.
But you're saying that, and I take your point, but I'm kind of curious and interested, and Brett, you probably have a stance on this one, but when we talk about, 360 video and tilt videos, you look at YouTube, and we have this entire network of videos now that any of them can be 360 if you upload it correctly and you want it to be a 360 video. You can make a 360 video and dump it on YouTube, within a matter of hours if you really wanted to do that. So when you look at it in that context, anybody can be a VR content creator in the same way that anybody can record, a video and put it on YouTube. So when you look at it in that context, is that necessarily going to be self-policing when you have such a wide audience of people who can not just be an audience but can be a content creator as well? And if nobody is giving them guidance, if nobody is sharing that information with them on actually how do you do this and do it well so that you aren't making everybody sick, will we end up with a YouTube of really bad content creators? Essentially, that idea that everybody is self-publishing, and what they're self-publishing is not necessarily good quality.
Yeah, I think a platform like YouTube is definitely where you're going to see some innovation happen, but I think in ways that are going to be unexpected, because it's not going to be innovation happening from brands or big companies. It's actually going to be innovation from creators. And as I was saying before about once they can get their hands on the technology and start working with it, I think we're going to be surprised by the degree of applications and ways they find of using it, and also find their own particular style and language for creating content around it. And also the beauty of YouTube is that the most successful creators on those platforms are people who are able to, with very little resources, be able to create great engaging content, be able to present a personality, but be able to do it in a sustainable and ongoing way and build an audience. And I think all it takes is the right kind of creators to get behind it, to find the right way and approach to it, to then be able to start leading the way and even finding the right syntax and dialogue and mode of using it in a particular way. I think mobile's going to be one of those kind of really entry-level, easy ways that people are going to get into it, because everyone has a mobile phone. Mobile usage is going up year on year on year in terms of video. I think VR is going to play a big part into that. I think it's going to be very soon that we're going to see, I don't know how, but I have faith that the viewing experience in terms of 360 video and VR is going to become more and more streamlined. I mean, we still need to remember that computers used to be gigantic boxes that would sit on our desks, but now they're so simple and compact and streamlined. I think the same is going to happen with VR technology as well. And I think once all we need is for the big companies to get behind it, which seems to be happening at the moment, for brands and events and places like that to be kind of leading the charge in terms of spending money on developing content, so that in turn feeds back into R&D for the people that are making the technology, so that they can update what their technology is. And then I think you're going to start seeing that trickle-down effect of the second and third and fourth generation of this technology being smaller, more compact, more accessible, cheaper for people to access, and more, again, coming back to that word ubiquitous, where anyone can be able to pick up a camera or pick up the mobile headset, whatever, however that's going to look in 2 or 3 years' time, and have an experience. We've got examples already of open world games, of places of online experiences like Second Life and the Sim games as well, where there is a degree of understanding of what makes a good experience. It's just now we are adding to it this degree of actually making it truly immersive with, say, 360 video or VR. And I think this is the other bit of the puzzle that we now seems like it's the right timing for it to happen.
Steve, what's your take on the YouTube question?
Yeah, I think that the YouTube question is quite an interesting one, because I don't want a whole load of 360-degree videos about cats. Well, I'm sure a couple of them are going to be okay, but just one or two will be enough. And I think it'll split into two different things. I think that the VR and YouTube is already out there, so the genie's already out of that bottle. So I think that will tend to be a little bit sort of amateurish. But I think there are a lot of other platforms now looking towards presenting really sort of what I call in quotes professional virtual reality, and I think those are the ones that will actually sort of help push this forward. And really, it's going to be a case of the more good content that there is out there, that eventually that will just bury the bad content anyway. So I think that's something that will happen. I'm also in the process of actually helping to put together a worldwide virtual reality and AR association, which is actually going to help this hopefully as well. So that's going to be, we're hoping to get all the major players involved in that so that we can actually speak as one voice as a new industry.
Just to add to that as well, please. I would just say that I think what's really important with YouTube as well is to really bear in mind that some of the top creators on those kind of platforms and other platforms who are really strong influencers, they are going to be really key to helping with the adoption of this new technology and new content. And I think also we need to have a very open mind in terms of content, because I think the division between saying what is professional and what is not, I think is all kind of relative, and it's all dependent on the creator and their audience. I think there's lots of potential for, say, creators on YouTube, on Facebook and other kind of platforms who are really going to be showcasing something amazing, but have the audience behind them to be able to really deliver that experience and be able to lead the way in terms of getting other people on board with it.
I tend to agree, and I take both points here, but I'm curious from your perspective, Dave, because in the games industry, we're very established. We understand that there are AAA studios, and then we understand that there are indie studios, and beyond indie studios, there's just the individual developers who might be in their bedroom somewhere but end up becoming an indie studio, and there is this blurring of line, I think, with VR, where actually content creation in VR doesn't necessarily have to be about how big is your studio, how many devs do you have, how much scope do you have to be able to do this, but more a case of, do you have the right equipment? If you do, and you have a creative approach to this, go for it. And I think that is part of the cultural evolution and shift that we're seeing just generalistically in the way that content is being created. Dave, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this in terms of where you think this will go for VR, and whether or not you think there will be that line between professional and kind of, I'm not going to say unprofessional, but independent.
Well, you highlight the interesting thing about VR dev there, which is you don't need a huge art team to create an amazing experience. And that's because you can create an amazing experience in one room, and in AAA titles, I find it must be tough for some of the artists, because people are basically running faster than Usain Bolt past this amazing artwork and not really taking the time to take it in. And that's because you're looking at this screen, and it's what 30% of your vision, and so on. And a number of things have been put into those experiences to make them more exciting, like speed and camera shake and all these other things, which perhaps aren't relevant to VR. So I think it's leveled the playing field, And you look at something like the music industry, and punk or dance music kind of did the same. It's technology. Like if you take dance music, the technology was there that you didn't need a big orchestra, or you didn't need a huge band to get to make a great record. So in that industry, people started making from the bedrooms and started making dance music. And I think VR is having a similar impact. So then it will be a more graded experience from what you might call amateur through to professional. And people like in music will release records, but it might not be a full-time job for them. Or it might be a passion project that they're happy to sit in the bedroom and do, and they don't need a massive record contract to do it, and they find a partner that's an independent record label. And I think we'll probably get that kind of approach to development. I mean, for me personally, the way I look at it is when I was a teenager, which sadly was a long, long time ago, everybody wanted to be in a band, and now I think everybody wants to be a game developer.
Oh, I don't know about that. I thought everybody wanted to be a reality TV star. Is that not the thing?
I was talking to people about reality TV, and I think that it's probably run its course.
You're probably actually very right about that.
I'm sort of trying to talk to teenagers now. I think a lot of them are quite interested in technology and doing something interactive and with technology. And I think that something like VR is a great opportunity for that. And I hope that it will be easy for people to get the tools to do that, and for there to be platforms out there for them to publish things. Because in any industry, it's not like everyone can be the most successful. There's always some kind of pyramid. That's fortunately or unfortunately the way the world works, particularly in creative industries. But nevertheless, I think VR is a great new playground for everyone to go into. It does level the playing field, so it means that people with a great creative vision can make their way quicker into this new world. It's not sewn up by a few big organisations. So that will only be for the next 2 or 3 years, and then, to be honest, it will get a bit sewn up, I think. But
I don't think it'll even take 2 or 3 years. I think it'll be quicker than that, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, possibly. Well, let's see. I mean, you could well be right if you look at the smartphone as an example. But, it might take longer than we think for VR to become mass market. It might. The adoption, I think a lot of people are assuming an adoption rate of similar to smartphone.
I do think it's going to take a lot longer for adoption, but in terms of publishers and distributors and where people can go to publish their content, I think that's going to get sewn up pretty quick.
Right. Yeah, possibly. I mean, I actually think we're going to have a great year this year. I think this time next year there might be a bit of an anticlimax.
Oh yes, without doubt.
And then it'll rise again at perhaps a little bit slower pace after that.
Yes, I think after April, things will ideally calm down in everybody's who's in the VR industry's world a little bit. But what I think is quite interesting is this idea that there needs to be a cultural shift or a cultural addressing of this balance and this blurring of lines and the fact that somebody in their bedroom is just as capable of creating VR content as somebody sitting in some extended part of Industrial Light and Magic creating content. And so I'm interested to understand what your thoughts are in terms of these cultural shifts or these technological shifts that you think need to happen in order for your respective industries to be able to continue forwards with VR. And I'm going to throw this one at you, Steve, first, because you're used to answering these big questions.
I think you're right. I think what's going to happen in the short term is that I think that there will be a bit of a peak, and then there's going to be sort of a trough after that. But then I think virtual reality is definitely here to stay. What will happen is that AR and mixed reality will come along and will become part of the same thing, although they will be two totally separate mediums. And this is what I find sort of so fascinating and so exciting, is that really I've never known anything happen like this before, where I think the technology is catching up with the imagination, which is absolutely fantastic. And so it's going to be great to see what happens. But I think it's going to be a merger of AR and VR over the next 5 to 10 years, which is really going to cement everything.
Okay. And Brett, what would be your thoughts on what you think is going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think I agree definitely with Steve, and I think a key part of it is going to be accessibility for audiences. So that's one key element, and which everyone who's making a headset is trying to achieve this year, is being able to get the viewing experience into consumers' hands. Once there's a big enough audience base, then you're going to see, once that reaches that kind of tipping point, that's when I think in terms of the development of content for that, you're going to see that kind of grow exponentially then. That is the one key element to overcome. Initially, things like 360 video are a great gateway drug, I think, to the VR experience, and something that's accessible on the current technology we have, and it isn't asking a lot of people to get the experience. And then once we can find a viewing experience that's going to be more easily accessible and more integrated into our phones and our laptops and our home entertainment systems, that's where you're going to see the explosion. So that's kind of what I'm waiting for.
Okay. And Dave, what's your thoughts on what that cultural or technological shift needs to be?
So I think, particularly in games, a lot of people are still thinking about what works in traditional games. So, they're hung up on traditional game controllers or traditional game mechanics. And actually, we need to kind of let go of that baggage. And I've often used, I like to look at previous entertainment industries to kind of learn about what we can learn about the current status. So I've used the example in the past of when movies went from silent movies to talkies. And at the time, there's big studio execs saying, "Oh, we don't need sound in our films," because they were a big player in the status quo, and they didn't necessarily realise that the change that was coming was such a significant improvement for the end user. So I think that we need to let go of that baggage and embrace the new world. And I hope that some people can make some more bold decisions internally and externally to really let VR fly. So, if you look at the silent movies, it actually took 10 years for silent movies to kind of disappear, even though in our minds it sort of feel like, it happened overnight.
History is such a wonderful thing.
Because all the cinemas needed to have sound systems put in. And that took time, I'm not saying 10 years, that was then and this is now. But nevertheless, there's some quite big things that need to change. And I think it's really in people's minds that we need to let go of the old and embrace the new.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for joining me on this Digital Jam session. As usual, we like to give our listeners a way of being able to follow you and find out a little bit more about what you're up to. So if you are interested in sharing with us your social media handle of choice, I'm going to ask you, Steve, first of all, for yours.
Right, Tanya. My social media handle of choice is Twitter, and it's at ARReality. That's ARREALITY.
Thank you very much. And Brett?
You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at Brett Snellgrove. That's BRETTSNELGROVE.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dave?
I'm Twitter as well, and I'm at Dr. Dave, and that's with 2 underscores, so Dr__Dave.
I love it. Dr. Dave. You're the second official doctor we have had on the Digital Jam sessions.
Have you had several unofficial ones?
Well, we've had people who claim to be a doctor but don't necessarily have that PhD, but but we have had Joe. Joe definitely does have one.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to thank you all for joining us. If you enjoyed this content and you would like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe and review. And don't forget to join us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. But thank you once again for joining us on this Digital Jam session. DigitalJamSessions.com